Hey, welcome to the Bayou Progressive. My name's Quentin Anthony Anderson, and today we're joined by Lauren Jewett, a longtime special education teacher, a union leader, and the lone Democratic candidate for Louisiana's 1st Congressional District. Jewett is challenging House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, who has represented the district in Congress since 2008, and she's doing it in an election that's already changed considerably since she first entered the race. From Louisiana's brief cup of coffee with closed congressional primaries to a return to the state's traditional jungle primary this November. We're sitting down with Lauren to talk about why she's running, what she believes this district needs from its next representative, and how she makes the case for change in one of Louisiana's most reliably Republican congressional districts. So without further ado, my interview with Lauren Jewett. You've been running for Congress through um, essentially two different iterations of this race. Um, for somebody who's never heard your name though before, if they weren't really paying attention in the spring and they weren't paying attention in your previous races, uh, tell folks who Lauren Jewett is and why did you decide to run for Congress? Not just this time, but in the past. Why have you submitted yourself to be a public servant in this environment that we're in?
That's a great question. So I ran for office before. I ran 4 years ago for the school board in Jefferson Parish, where I live and own my home. I did that after a lot of work on other people's campaigns. Once you work on, and I didn't work, I volunteered really my time and my talent and my energy to knock on doors, which is what I'm really known for. And once you do that enough, people start asking, when are you going to run for something? And I just kind of kept putting it off. And then COVID happened, and there were so many situations where teachers and educators, and we were essentially a little bit frontline at that point, we were being excluded from a lot of decision making on reopening and safety procedures. And so there were a lot of opportunities at that moment where our union was getting calls from media outlets and journalists wanting to know where are teachers' heads at this moment, like what are the teachers feeling and doing in response to different things that were coming down the pipeline. So I did get on the news a lot and speak on behalf of teachers, and I was an elementary teacher at that time, so we were one of the first set of teachers to go back early, and so I kind of got a little bit thrown into a little bit of leadership or public light in a sense there. And so I ran for the position a year later in the school board in Jefferson. And at the time, I worked in Orleans, which is where most of my career has been. But I felt that during COVID, a lot of people saw the work that teachers do, and there was a respect for that. And then it started slowly to shift where there was this vilification of teachers and kind of the rhetoric around um, critical race theory and all these things, and it just became so divisive in a way that I thought education was not a divisive thing. Yeah. It is very bipartisan. People want good schools, people care about children, and so I thought, well, it's important to have teachers' voices on school boards, and that's typically we're actually in the minority on school boards. Mm-hmm. Educators or people who've had education classroom experience. And so I thought it was important to have a teacher's voice on a school board, which is why I put my name into consideration to first apply for a vacancy that was there and then run for the open seat later in the fall. But not only that, working in special education, you often don't have people making decisions who even understand the legalities of that. And even people who work in schools sometimes don't know all of that stuff too. So it was really important to me as somebody who's grown up with somebody in my family with a disability, has young nephews who rely on services, and has served children with disabilities my whole life to make sure that we had an advocate up there for families and for educators, because I've seen both sides. So I got into that. I didn't win, but I'm really proud of that race because I ran all year. I knocked on doors, like thousands of doors. I was out fundraising, and I made a runoff by 10 votes.
That's incredible.
So, I say that because people often say, well, my vote doesn't count. And obviously, we've seen many instances instances where that has people voted, they elected somebody and then took their position away, or we've gotten judgeships taken away in New Orleans.
Yeah.
But in that situation of running, I mean, that was 5 houses with 2 voters or something.
Yeah,
I mean, that was just me knocking when I was tired after school. So, you know, I ran for that, and then I was tired, and then the next year I ran again, like any wild person would. And I ran for the seat that I had been looking at, which was the state school board position, and that was an open seat as well. And that was the same ticket as the governor's race. As we know, the turnout was not really great at that time.
Abysmal, yeah.
And I ran in it mostly because I felt that there weren't people I saw putting their name forward. I even was in grad school all summer out of state and gave my proxy paperwork and my nomination fees to my friend and just said, well, I'll let you know if I want to do it. I was kind of on the fence. And so she went and took my stuff up and did it once I gave her the green light, and it was like the same week I graduated. I qualified for office, like I was in my master's program. But I did it because I wasn't hearing anybody else other than a termed out legislator. And I said, well, I don't want this person to walk into the seat. I don't believe in that. I really think seats should not go uncontested. It really bothers me. I see that on a lot of down ballot races, that either people just don't know about it or people just aren't putting themselves forth. So after those 2 races, I was like, this is a lot. And then I did run for Democratic Party leadership and helped other people get on either the DPACs or the DSCC. And I ran for that because I wanted to see more infrastructure for helping people run for office. I ran for office with the tools because I had worked and volunteered on campaigns and learned the ins and out of that.
Yeah.
But other people never probably had that experience. I learned my political education through labor unions. My grandmother was a president of her union and was a special ed teacher, and I didn't necessarily learn that, but it's in my blood. And then being a member of a union, being on an executive committee, membership of a labor union, I learned my political education through unionism. And I just felt that we weren't doing enough to build a bench. And so that was really my purpose of getting on the party and trying to improve that. I still think we have work to do in that regard. I think that there is efforts I'm seeing, especially heading into next year with a lot of state legislative positions and statewide positions being up. I do think that there is concerted effort to start doing identification of people who are already leaders in their community. But in this particular race for District 1, I know from running and seeing other people run that you can't just decide that you're going to run, especially for Congress, 2 weeks before qualifying. And I did not see myself running for Congress. I did see myself running for something again down the line. I got approached from people, hey, you should really think about running for something again, especially because I did a lot of canvassing work around amendments last year, the 2025 amendments, the 4 of them. And I knocked on a lot of precincts in my DSCC area, River Ridge, Metairie, and I like informing voters. I use my teacher mindset to go out and educate people. And after we defeated those amendments, people kept saying, oh, you should run for something again. I said, I don't know. And then some people said Congress, and I said, I don't know, that's a lot of work. That's a lot. But I wasn't seeing anybody put their name forth. And I knew, well, summertime is almost a year out from qualifying, and we're in this closed party primary system, so it's almost like we have to start a little earlier because of the election happening in the spring prior to general. And so I thought about it. I gave it some thought. I didn't just I'm going to do it. I wasn't impulsive about it. I was reflective about it. I did say, if I do this, I'm not doing it again without staff, because when I ran my other campaigns, it was all me, teacher organizer, and I said, I'm not doing this like this
What
again.
did you learn, like as a one man band? 'Cause I've done it.
Yeah, it's
As a one man
hard.
band, what did that teach you that informed once you were putting together an actual staff?
So I will say my aunt, like, she did my treasurer stuff when I did the local and the state school board races. But in terms of those races, I mean, like I said, I was the volunteer coordinator. I was cutting the turf. I knew all the intricacies of it. When I got ready to file my FEC paperwork, which doesn't mean you're on the ballot yet, you're just filing it with the Federal Election Commission. You do have to name a treasurer. So I did approach a friend who's a CPA at the time and or is still CPA, and did list her. And for a few months, I just really was relying on volunteers again, because I did that at the end of July, and then I was doing fundraising calls to try to raise money before I announced. I announced on Labor Day of last year. So we're getting almost up on the anniversary of my announcement. We're past the anniversary of me really being in it for real. But I would say so July, August, September, October, I wasn't paying any staff at that point yet. I was doing everything I could on volunteers until I could get some momentum.
Yeah.
And then I started bringing on staff in like late fall. And that was transformative, because then it felt like I wasn't like running around like crazy and, feeling chaotic. And so it did make it feel like it was more of a real campaign.
Yeah.
And I could do it well, because I was still working all full time last year too. And the goal was that I was not going to work during this last stretch of the campaign, which I'm not working right now. So I am sacrificing a salary for a few months, and I'm able to do that. And it's a privilege to do that. Not everybody can. But I know how much of importance this is, and I have to do it right and know that I did everything right. So having staff and bringing them along and growing the campaign has helped us. I will say that the cancellation did give us a little bit of a hurdle.
Yeah. Though, and I'm curious, because you've actually set me up for quite a few segues. With the cancellation of the closed primary, for other campaigns, I know that it certainly took some of the wind out of their sails, because what they were banking on was the ability to be able to say, I am the nominee. And like, it's just going to be me and the Republicans, so that's why it's different than past years.
Mm-hmm.
Still being the lone Democrat in your race, what was the effect from a donor perspective on the primary cancellation?
Yeah, so we were doing I was doing call time pretty much once I brought on staff. I'd started call time and reach out we were doing my Rolodex, but we started getting more sophisticated measures of how we were doing call time, which call time is when you're basically cold calling people and ask them for money, for people who don't know. But we were doing calls since like November, December. And so I was still doing those, still had my budgeting and fundraising goals that we were trying to hit. So we were banking on May being a good month, because mid-May was when the Republican primary was supposed to be decided. So Steve Scalise did have a primary challenger who is now also a qualified candidate in this open race. And I mean, we are anticipating that it was going to be Scalise. We were always setting that up in terms of the candidacy that would be decided upon in November. It was me versus the incumbent. I even made a video that we spent a good deal of money on. We've received very good feedback on that video. We did the video on April 1st. We filmed it, and then we released it right around all the chaos, because I wanted to release it during Teacher Appreciation Week, and I had to go through editing, and it was just ready at that point. It's like, so we got to release it because it will help us generate some money around all this. But it did impact donors, because donors were confused. I don't know if you remember when you were running that, but donors don't tend to like to donate until after a primary is decided, and we do things kind of, different here in Louisiana, but we weren't. So when I did make phone calls at first people were asking if I had an opponent, and I said, well, qualification hasn't happened. This was pre-February. And then I did have somebody. They did end up withdrawing within 2 weeks, and I've gone to lunch with him. Like, he has my signs out now, like a super cool guy. But the race, like, cancellation, it didn't affect the fact that I knew I was still going to run. Yeah. People were asking a lot about the maps, who lived here. The donors, I had to tell the story. Yeah. For people out of state. I said, well, this is what happened. I said, did you hear about the Supreme Court case? Did you hear about the redistricting? Some of them had heard about the Supreme Court case because it was my own mother. I called her, I was coming back from a forum at a church on April 29th. I know that's her birthday. So now I'm always going to, like, associate her birthday with the Supreme Court case, because I called her and I said, I got to call my mom. It's her birthday. So I called her and I said, well, I want to wish you a happy birthday. This is like 8:30 at night. She said, what's going on with this Supreme Court case? And I said, well, I was like, I started going on a whole contextual thing, but I said, I don't think it's going to affect us for this race. Yeah. And then, of course, I spoke too soon, because then I got home and then I was getting texts about Landry might cancel the election. And I said, what? And then, of course, it just snowballed after that. But it did affect our donors, and I did have to restructure staff at the end of that month. And June and July were so hard. Like, I was on the phone a lot asking for money. And also it impacted us as a campaign for endorsements that we applied for, because national groups, they were not, I thought we would probably receive more endorsements after that had been the head-to-head decide on May 16th. And it just, all the endorsement questionnaires started stopping, or we weren't getting an answer back. Mm-hmm. And some of these are endorsements that come with material resources, whether it's social media platforming, money, national phone bankers, just all of that stuff. And so it was just us fighting for our campaign life, like in June and July. And so I had to downsize and restructure what my staff was doing to be able to come back at full force for the month of August. And we are in a good spot now, but it was rough. Even as somebody who was the nominee, because at that point I didn't know what the field was, and I had to tell people that, I don't know what the field is, because our candidacies were just wiped off the ballot. It's as if they never existed, which also wiped off my petition that we had spent time doing.
I'm curious. I've never asked anybody this, but I kind of want to. I want to ask you, because there's a perception sometimes on the part of the public, on the part of activists, that they roll their eyes when campaigns are asking for money. And on one hand, like I get where they might be coming from. In their mind, why can't just good candidates run, put their message out there, and may the best candidate win? Can you explain why the conversation about money in politics is complicated? Like the sort of bifurcation of the legitimate concerns that people have about the influence of money in politics, the influence of, like a rich donor being able to call up the rep that he got elected, versus sort of the bare minimum of being able to run a campaign that reaches the amount of voters that makes it even possible for you to be competitive, and how that conversation sometimes kind of gets conflated. I know that was sort of a little bit of a jumble of a question, but just the complicated conversation about money in politics, and particularly why it's so important that candidates that people believe in at least have the requisite resources to be able to compete.
Yeah, I keep saying, well, I want to get money out of politics, but then I'm asking for money. And it's kind of like a both-sided thing. It feels weird. And I will say, as a teacher running before in school board races that aren't as sexy, but in that realm, teachers are always a type of profession and mindset that we are very resourceful and scrappy. And so I've taken that to every campaign I've run, because we know how to do a lot with little. Yeah. And I mean, that's just, and how to ration things and make sure, you're not, I mean, I would love to have more for our kids, but we just don't have that at this point, and that's why I'm fighting. So in a campaign, there's so many hidden costs that people don't see perception wise who've never run for office. I think people who've run for any level of office understand who it's expensive, even those lower level races like school board or a smaller local position. Just to get on the ballot, you have to pay either a couple $100s or up to thousands of dollars. And that's already a barrier to access for working class candidates or people you'd want to see on the ballot. So some people, it's just a drop in the bucket for them. They don't bat an eyelash. And I mean, I've qualified twice now by petition to not pay ballot fees for Congress, which are some of the highest fees. And then I did that same process for school board 4 years ago. The only reason I didn't do it for the state school board is it was a lot of signatures and I was trying to finish up graduate school. So you have to pay for things like a push card to hand to a voter. Everybody always wants signs. People wanted signs so early on in our campaign, and we didn't start getting signs until mid-July.
That is always the first purchase that makes my heart just drop a little bit, because it's not just the purchasing of the signs. It's that added piece where you realize, oh yeah, the stakes don't come with the signs.
The stakes
it's like doubles the cost.
When I've run for previous offices, if I had stakes left over, I in-kinded them to other volunteers.
My whole garage is full of stakes.
There you go.
I'm never.
In kind, and then I also hate the environmental piece of it. Somebody who's running on an environmental platform is like, in Orleans and in other certain parishes, they are allowed to put signs up 48 hours before election, and so they're just scattered all over the place, and it is the responsibility of candidates to go back and pick them up, and I've helped other candidates pick them up before, on my way home from work. I'm like, these are just littering all over the place. And so people who weren't doing that after several days, after it was like clearly beyond the time, I was like picking up the yardsticks and like recycling them for like future campaigns or like things because one, it's not good for the environment for those to just be littering there, and also like we need to use repurpose, like recycle, reduce, reuse, or repurpose. I'm a thrifter, like I buy a lot of my clothes at thrift stores, I think there's just too much trash and junk in the world. We have to just not be creating more waste. So the signs, push cards, which even with a push card, you're going to need someone to design the push card and make it look nice and fancy. And of course there's tools and stuff out there, but you do want to pay people for their expertise, graphic designers. There's the cost of social media. I had to do a little bit of that in the summer when I had to reconfigure staffing, but I did all my own social media for my other campaigns. But now it's like I did bring someone on because it's very hard when you're bopping around and doing so much of Congress.
I want to be like you when I grow up. I haven't gotten to that place.
So it's just there's so many facets, and then just paying people there's consultants and stuff out there, and you want to be careful about like what looking at contracts and looking at what the cost is. But for some people, this is their profession and they know the ins and outs of campaigns, and like they have to feed themselves too. So it's important that as someone who believes in the principles of paying people for their value and labor conditions and all that stuff, I don't want to exploit my campaign staff. Like, you shouldn't be exploiting anybody on a campaign staff or asking them to work for free, because no. I mean, we have super volunteers who just believe in the cause, and of course we have got interns. So we have found ways around how can we give people experience, and that's what they're getting in exchange for the work that they're providing. But then we do have seasoned professionals on a campaign, and that was something I knew I needed to budget for and raise enough money for. But just the bare bones stuff is you do need to give some people something at the door. you do need to buy a voter list. So
Yeah.
you're not just knocking on doors all over the place, because as my friend has said, you might as well just stand on the Mississippi like river like levee and just say vote for me if you're just
Yeah.
knocking on doors if you don't have your targeted voter list. But voter lists are also very pricey.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think people just don't know till they know. But we've been, like I said, kind of scrappy. My friend has been doing screen printing of shirts for us. Like, you know, we do want to try to have some merchandise available, but we've been trying to be like kind of scrappy a little bit, and hands-on and do it yourself. And
My last campaign,
yeah.
I bought a t-shirt press. It's in the garage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those where the more you can do, the more capable, particularly with smaller campaigns, you can pull off. The bigger the campaign, scale even makes it so that even if you personally can do certain things, it's just not even feasible to being able to do it. The reason I ask that question, though, is I sometimes, particularly in a state like Louisiana, where Democrats have gotten uncomfortably comfortable with losing, because it just happens, whether it's because of gerrymandering or lack of turnout, that sometimes people can also normalize this idea of, well, if my candidate also knows that they're going to lose, then they should like run a campaign that is kind of consistent with that. That why are you trying to raise millions of dollars? Why are you trying to raise this amount of money when, like, at the end of the day, you're running on principle? And I try to tell people, one, like, if there is a difference between the candidate that actually believes in what they're talking about and wants to win, and the candidate that is running as a protest vote. And a serious candidate has to run a serious campaign, and there are just baked in costs. And in a perfect world, I'd love for those costs not to exist. But in order to, if there's 1 million voters in a district, the only way that you're even going to have a shot at winning is if at least all those 1 million voters know that you're running. And just them knowing that you're running costs money. The average voter is not looking up every candidate. They're not doing all of their homework. And so a lot of it is the proactiveness of the campaign to be able to do it.
Right. Yeah. And people have asked me, oh, can I drop something or pick something up from your headquarters? And I'm like, it's my house. and I do know that there's, I'm running a race where I'm not accepting corporate PAC money. Now, there is PAC money that is different that people have to understand. I've received money from labor PACs before in the past, and those are different.
What's the distinction? How do you make that distinction?
So the corporate PAC money is coming from a lot of like corporations, like businesses, and like a labor union PAC is like, a lot of times it's like being cobbled together. And I say cobbled together because it's from like, people adding that onto their dues or like whatever like they're doing, like that is associated with the political arm of different groups. People can form their own PACs and things like that. So it's the issue I take note of in our campaign is the incumbent has taken so much money from the fossil fuel industry and from organizations that I think are harming our livelihoods here, and I just don't want to be associated with like that, because that's not where my values as a campaign is. Now, I will say, people also say, well, I don't want to, it is a horse race kind of thing, like where people have very interesting donor habits where they will donate to both candidates of both different parties, because it's like betting. It's like horse betting a little bit, where they want to put their money on the winning candidate or the one that they think has the most momentum. But I'm like, you also get momentum by raising money, because people look at that. Like, they look at the FEC reports that got quoted to me today was somebody I was talking to from the media, but they were quoting something from the end of June. Yeah. And I said, we've raised far past that now, and we're proud to say that we've got a lot of small dollar donations, like over 10,000 individual donors, and it's like an average of like $25 or something like that. So that's the type of campaign I want to run, is like the small dollar donations. And it means a lot when someone donated $3 or $5, because it's like they could have been giving that, they could have been spending that on anything else, like school supplies for their children or something like that. Like, but they chose to invest it in us because they believe in that. But there are people who are like, well, I'm not gonna invest in races that are just like, there's no chance in hell that this person will win. And I just say, well, you don't stop going to your sports games, if you don't think, like, just because you think your team has no shot of winning, like, or getting to the playoffs or winning.
The tickets are a little bit cheaper in December.
Right. Right. Yeah. But like, I live right near the Saints training facility. Yeah. So it just like popped in my head where I'm like, well, all these people are going to the Saints training facility. And like, you know, I grew up in upstate New York, so my dad was a diehard Bills fan, and like they were doing really well the last couple of years, but there were a lot of times where they were not. And Buffalo Bills fans go sit out in the snow and watch that like team play, even if they knew they weren't gonna have a winning season. But you still go and support them, like just like we still need people to go and vote. We still need people to like participate in the process of democracy. We just don't write it off because they're like, we're not gonna win.
So I think you actually said, because I'm trying to get back actually to the question of why you're running for Congress, but you're giving me, because you just gave me really a good segue.
I know, I kind of go around.
No, but this one was good. And I really like the Bills analogy, because I think Bills fans might be a little bit less fair weather than Saints fans.
Yeah.
Those images of them in the snow is iconic.
They're tough.
They are.
It's a toughness, and I have that toughness. I grew up in the winters of New York.
They're being rewarded for it, so I appreciate it. There is that sense, though, of diminishing returns, and that many Democratic voters in particular, as Democrats perform worse each cycle, they then start to bake in that that's how Democrats perform. And so the urgency to turn out diminishes. And what it takes for a candidate, particularly in a situation like yours where you're running in a reliably Republican district, it was gerrymandered to be Republican, the incumbent's been there for 18 years, it makes the ask on the part of the candidate in the campaign that much harder to say, well, this time makes a difference.
I know. Being
realistic, why should somebody show up if they showed up in 18, they showed up in 20, they showed up in 22, they showed up in 24? Why should somebody keep showing up in our democracy in a situation like the Louisiana 1st Congressional District?
It's a great question. Well, I show up and vote in every election, and I know some people this could be their first election, and I'm not shaming anybody for whatever part of the pathway they've gotten to this point. That question, you know, we've had candidates that have run as Democrats in the 1st Congressional District several cycles. They've been wonderful candidates. I think I can speak on my race is that we got out the gate early because we know what it would take to build infrastructure and get a longer runway and time to build the necessary funding. And we are on track, probably, I would say, in the next few days to like raise more than anybody's raised in any of those cycles that you just named as a no party or Democratic candidate. And I have a ground game. Like we have knocked thousands of doors. And I think that's the difference between maybe previous cycles, and also because this has been so wacky with what happened with the closed party primary getting canceled for U.S. House, the redistricting, so many attacks on voting rights. It is the second Trump presidency where this is the second midterm, like, because the last midterm was 2018 and we had I think we had 3 Democrats running. But in this particular case, I have encountered people of not my party background who are saying, like, I am so dismayed, whereas this is an inflection point. Like, and I felt like the vibes were heading that way after the 2024 election. And, I'm not a mind reader, futuristic. Like, I can't tell you, okay, it is very hard for us. Like, we have hurdles. We have a huge hill to climb. I'm not Pollyanna-ish about this, but we're also setting it up in a sense, because if no one did run, we're not building the data for like when there is a moment where it is going to matter. It could be this election, it could be 2028, it could be 2030. Like, we have to be running somebody like every single time. And I know that that's a hard case and thing to sell to somebody, but I'm of the belief we've got to get people to run on every office level, because it does build the capacity for the next person. And there will come a time where the person in the seat will eventually step down or not run for whatever reason. And we have to be ready. Like, we have to be building that infrastructure. And it's a long game. And it's a long game that the Democrats have not played in the same way that the Republican Party has played. And, I also believe that I don't need to be in an elected position to serve, but I do want to serve this way. I obviously am running for a third time, and I've run local, state, now federal. I love serving in my classroom, but the reason I decided to get into this race at this time in this moment is because I knew if I was teaching right now in the classroom, as my colleagues have, I would be I would be losing it. My mom would be losing it, because I just saw so many other things besides school-based stuff that were affecting kids and families. And I am an advocate for kids and families, and I knew that I needed to advocate for them in terms of the food insecurity, the healthcare access worries, the issues around due process with ICE in our communities. And it was going beyond just things around curriculum and testing and school funding. But I work with kids with disabilities. The Department of Education has been literally dismantled, but not an act of Congress, but just by piecemealing it off. And this is the department that oversees civil rights laws for students like mine. And I had families telling me they were concerned of the oversight that their kids' rights were going to have, because in Louisiana we have not done right by them. We've had legislative audits that have shown that we haven't been doing right, and education is supposed to be a state's thing. So if you want to put it back to the states, well, we've already had issues of parents having to go to the legislature and change the law because their kids are not protected. So now we have no other mechanism at a federal level. That's a huge problem. So I do think that my reason for running is there's so many compounding issues that affect kids. Yeah. And as an advocate for children, I said, I can't no more. And as somebody who has a degree in history and a degree in English literature, all of the attacks on just knowledge and science. And I just want to be able to say I can look back to in 2 to 3 to 4 decades and say I stood up and had courage when a lot of people wouldn't, or a lot of people were fearful, and some people can't because of whatever situation they are in life, but I can. So I'm going to do it.
You mentioned that you've obviously run for local school board, and then you ran for Bessie. Mm-hmm. Why Congress? What is specific about Congress? Why do you want to serve in this capacity? And how is it consistent? If somebody were to kind of read through your bio and to look at the last few races you've run, why does it make sense that Lauren Jewett is running for Congress in 2026?
So obviously with my background, I kind of just gave a little bit of information about being a teacher and all of the things that our kids face. I think my profession maps right onto policy there, because there's so many things that we deal with and absorb as educators, societal ills, social ills that are not being addressed or should be addressed and are spilling over into our classrooms. So I think that my profession maps onto that. I also think I have a long time union labor organizing background. And right now, we have a minimum wage in our state, which is $7.25, and we need to raise the minimum wage nationally. That is an issue for workers. I have that expertise of how we should be protecting workers and ensuring that they have safe working conditions, that they have access to benefits that they need, because we're creating the working class and middle class are creating the wealth. But we're not seeing that. It's just, we have a lot of billionaires and trillionaires who are profiting off of that, and yet people can't get basic health care or pay for their groceries and get safe groceries that they can eat because we have lack of regulation on all fronts.
Lettuce is pretty affordable right now, though.
Yeah, I haven't eaten a salad all summer. It's been very sad. And now it's like popsicles and other things that are on the list, and it's just wild. And so my labor organizing background, my background of working in schools, I've been a community advocate, delivering meals to families. I've spent a long time working with a group where we send books to people who are incarcerated, and we know Louisiana has a lot of for-profit prisons, and we incarcerate so many people here, and there's been a lack of even due process on some regard with that, and that is because everybody has the right to literacy, and if the point of sending somebody to a prison is to have some rehabilitative factor and you don't have any ways of doing that, some of our prisons don't even have libraries. We've learned these things by people writing letters to us. We learn these things from community, people learn things from community visitations. That all of that work, my work is expansive. It is beyond the classroom walls, and then just on top of that, the district I live in and have lived in. At this point with redistricting, my old apartment is now in there. So I've lived in every place I've lived in Louisiana is now in District 1, as is mapped out right now. But the district is one of the coastal districts, District 3 being the other one, and picking up half of Terrebonne Parish now. It was already coastal. Now it's even more coastal. Issues of environment, to me, are of significance because we are usually these areas in Lafitte, Grand Isle, St. Bernard, Plaquemines, Lafourche, Terrebonne. These are areas that have coastal erosion that is happening at some of the fastest rates in the country. These are areas that are still recovering from storms, and we're just at an epicenter in the state of climate issue. We already see that in other parts of the state, and I would be an advocate for other parts of the state because I've done a lot of research and work. Even my old district, as it was, they were building the carbon capture project in Ascension, in Sorrento, near an elementary school, and I didn't know a ton about the carbon capture stuff up until last summer when I started reading about it. And I went to the hearings and listened and testified. And I worked at a school in St. John in the Cancer Alley area that is no longer operating because it was so close to a petrochemical plant. We are continuing to allow these companies and corporations to come in. And yes, they might be providing jobs for a short term, but then on the long term end, we're left with the health issues, the environmental cost, and that's a problem. So I think we have to address that stuff, and it's amazing to me to just see the pushback on lots of sides for these hyperscale centers, the carbon capture projects, and it being such a resonant issue for folks for many different reasons. But as an advocate for kids, what are we leaving for our kids? We're leaving a disaster zone. When this is sportsman's paradise, it should be sportsman's paradise for our kids, not a toxic dumping ground, and that's what it's been left. So I love living in Louisiana. I mentioned I lived in New York, and winters are brutal. I love being outside. It's a beautiful place, and we need to keep it beautiful and also keep it here for longevity. And I think that work is somewhat addressed in Congress, and we're not doing that. And I think we also have lessons to teach the rest of the country too in that regard. I was at a climate meeting, and
someone said, Louisiana and particularly New Orleans was one of the first areas where people is shown because of Hurricane Katrina people had to move because of climate and because of environment.
Yeah.
And we have to learn from those lessons. And there's infrastructure and technology that we have here that we can be sharing with other parts of the country that have also dealt with flooding, who said they were never, thought they were going to have to deal with significant weather events like they've had. And Congress deals with FEMA, federal emergency management, response, and flood insurance, and all the things that are driving people away from states like Louisiana because people can't afford their homes. Yeah. Even myself, I've dealt with that. I had to rebuild my roof and carport after Hurricane Ida and deal with insurance companies, and it's a nightmare.
I'm not looking forward to
Sorry.
My house is covered by trees. It is. It's the only downside.
Homeownership is a labor of love.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's why I think people hold fiercely to something they worked hard. Mm-hmm. You can't say American dream, and then, you're dealing with all this American nightmare stuff.
Yeah.
It is American nightmare.
I'm curious, how do you balance, because obviously you have new investments happening, both in your district and in District 3 in Acadiana.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously you have the data centers in Richland in District 5. How do you balance, your environmental positions and the urgency of prioritizing our environment and our climate with the economic considerations that obviously Republicans prioritize, but has been a very big part of the equation here in Louisiana. That has often been why we justify, the massive tax breaks for oil and gas. It's often been why, the Republicans have justified a much more lenient government position towards industry, and increasingly now the AI industry, is because of the economic benefits. The fact that these are big industries that are willing to invest billions, potentially trillions of dollars into Louisiana, and that it's a competitive market. We're not just competing against Texas and Florida anymore. We're competing against places all over the globe. We have to do what we have to do. How do you balance that when thinking about your position on some of these industries coming into Louisiana?
Yeah, I think there is always that balance, is the environment and then economic jobs and being labor oriented too.
Because the argument that Republicans will make is that it's wonderful to have a clean environment 50 years from now, but if there's nobody there to enjoy it, then what was really the point?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to. I'm not saying get rid of every business and industry, but there has to be regulations, and I think that it's been so free from all that. And I mean, I was asked about the AI data centers. I think during qualifying, somebody asked, one of the reporters asked, and I said, technology is not a bad thing, innovation is not a bad thing, but there's been no regulation or a study of at least AI of how that's really going to impact and the energy that it's going to suck up in terms of water. So I have a lot of reservation of just saying yeah, I'll come in and have your tax breaks and this and that. And but then what are we doing to pour back into people's needs, schools, good infrastructure? Because some of these projects have a lot of noise pollution, obviously pollution when we're talking about environmental, but noise pollution, and just for the people that live around there, what kind of protocols are we having that have some kind of regulatory thing? Because there's been so much rollback on Environmental Protection Agency regulations for clean air and clean water. We have to follow some rules. There has to be some kind of oversight on stuff. And I think if we're trying to also look at how do we move towards cleaner energy sources, which I think is something we should be exploring, instead of just relying on what we had, because it's not going to be there either. If we exhaust, those resources, how do we train and skill people up for those kinds of industries and jobs, and make sure that they're good union paying jobs, and that we're once they have received the skills, they're training up other people so that they can see themselves living here. Because I mean, you can bring in business and industry, but if like you're making the children sick and like, because their organs are still developing and they're tiny. I mean, people move to places for good schools and good community. They're not just moving for jobs. That's one piece of the puzzle. Yeah. And so that all has to be part of the equation. And I do think, you know, people of the Republican Party or people who are very like business minded, they understand that. I mean, I see that in Jefferson Parish. They know the importance of strong, good schools and like investing in early childhood. And there's been so much work on that. So we have to make sure that the businesses though have some regulations and just don't get like, all that tax break and then nothing is being poured back in.
Yeah. On AI, I'm curious what your thoughts on the technology is, federal regulations, the lack thereof right now on the technology, but also, I think that there's at least two camps, maybe three camps in terms of some of the skepticism of AI. There's the camp that is skeptical of the technology itself, what its impact could be, whether it's socially or its impact on the economy, like the workforce. Mm-hmm. And then there are folks who, a little bit of a segue from the last question, who their opposition or skepticism of it is more so about the climate impact of the technology, mm-hmm. what it's doing to water usage.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on AI as an emerging technology, but also as a huge emerging economic force right now?
Yeah. Well, I will say that I do think there should be a moratorium right now until we can do more research
on the data centers or on the technology as a whole.
On the data centers, but we do need to have like more understanding of just the technology, because it's happening so rapidly. But the data centers, like, because of all of the impacts, I have a lot of concern about that without having like any kind of studies that are showing the impact. But as a teacher, I mean, I know that they're bringing in a lot of AI tools and things like that. And we have to distinguish too. There's always been a lot of AI around as technology, like assistive AI technology. I mean, search engines and things like that. It's been around. It's been creeping around. But assistive is different than generative. And like generative AI, where I get really annoyed with a lot of the flyers. And then like even sometimes when people have sent me things, they're like, oh, I wanted to make this and I did it on AI. And I'm like, this doesn't look like me. I was like, please don't use this. Like, I don't really prefer it. Like I have kind of a policy, like my staff already knows that. We're like, no, we're not doing that. I want people to still use the creative spaces of their brain. And I think because we live in a fast-paced world, and we, don't maybe value those things as much. I think we should, because in Louisiana, it's like we have culture and music and like art, and those are things that I worry about with AI, that it will reduce the creativity and innovation that we do need, where people are just not like, oh, I'm just going to chat GPT this, versus taking more time and thought and being in community. And I worry about it for our kids. I do think that there needs to be some structures in place, because for developing minds who can't distinguish between things, that's a problem. And I've even seen AI flyers or information out there, and I'm like, that's not even the correct map or something like that, or that's not the correct information. Yeah. So it's people aren't even double checking if they use it. Yeah. It's where our literacies, it's the literacy skills and critical thinking skills are just so important. So I do think, again, leaning on educators who can help kind of maneuver around this technology, because oftentimes with new technology, you have people who are skilled to be teaching as educators, whether it's at a primary or secondary level. So there is a lot to be said. I'm not going to say like everything should just like it's already in our, ecosystem, but how do we reel it in? Because I think it's gone out of control a little bit on the environmental sense. And yeah, we don't want it to replace people's work and jobs. I mean, there's some jobs that you just can't have a robot do. Like, even as a teacher, I'm like, there's so many of these memes out there of like, kids are going to find a way to like these robot teachers or AI teachers or whatever it is. They're like, kids are going to find a way to deprogram that real quick. Like, and they will. And it's like, because that's nursing, healthcare, teaching, education. Like, these are like also human-centered professions. Yeah. There's certain things that AI could do that like a human could never do that quickly. Again, there needs to be some parameters around a lot of this stuff, but we try not to like do all those like weird flyers. I would rather someone just like draw a stick figure flyer.
It feels like they're just going into AI and saying, make a flyer that says this, because all of them end up looking
they look exactly the same.
Yeah.
They all look the same, and I'm seeing it in political campaigns now.
And which on one hand, and it kind of goes to what we were talking about before about costs of the campaign and things like that. I get why these tools are attractive to people, because it's one less thing that they have to pay for, and it just checks a box. So I do get it. That's one of the reasons why I struggle with what the balance is here, because I get why people are embracing the tools.
Yes.
Right? Like it makes complete sense why they're embracing it. And it does sometimes feel like a little bit of privilege for me to say, no, like, design your own flyer. Like, I know how to do that. Or you can hire me to do it. But, like, I do get it, but that's one of the things that I'm struggling with is this technology is advancing so quickly, and it's making things accessible to people in a way that it wasn't.
Yeah.
But also, long-term, what are the consequences of essentially starting to create in people's minds this idea of an easy button?
And yeah, an easy button, and then it just makes it so that I think people are then having trouble even getting hired for that kind of work. So then how does that build like economic prosperity where people are getting paid to do that, and then that's generating money that they can be able to like help themselves, pay for what they need. I mean,
Well, and that's one of the things I try to in my normal job. I try to remind folks is that the cost of AI right now are artificially low, and so I think a lot of employers are rethinking mass layoffs that they were planning before, because they're not sure what these costs are going to jack up to. And it may, even right now, their usage of it, they're realizing the usage increases, the cost increases with usage. So, replacing that employee isn't as cheap as you thought that it was. And it may not be as cheap as you think that it is down the line. So I think there are companies and industries that are pressing the pause button on their plans to just replace their whole workforce with robots. But it's something that's on the horizon. Yeah,
and in education, I don't want it to also be used as like, we're going to just add more things onto teachers' plates, which always happens, especially with unfunded mandates, and then just like, but just use AI, and I'm just like, huh? And I think for IEPs, which is legal documents, like I said, I don't agree with people even like doing anything in that parameter of entering that into any kind of AI search engine or any of that. That's a big problem, confidential privacy wise, like, but the amount of parameters that are needed in education is important, because I just don't want it to be, well, we can just bigger, better, more, right? As like a society, like that's always just like chasing something. We have to step back and take a pause, I think, on some things with it. Yeah.
So one of the key issues, both in your platform, but also usually for almost any Louisiana candidate, is the cost of living, specifically around insurance. Homeowners insurance, car insurance are kind of the two top line that Louisianans are just paying an arm and a leg for. Realistically, though, if you were elected to Congress, what can the federal government do about specifically the cost of insurance in Louisiana, But in general, the cost of living, you mentioned raising the minimum wage, but what are some other things from a federal perspective the federal government can do to address the cost of living here in Louisiana?
So with the insurance issue, most of the home insurance stuff is dealt on a state level, but Congress deals with the flood insurance. And my flood insurance, I live in an ex-flood zone, meaning it doesn't tend to flood there. I made that choice too when I was looking at homes, purchasing homes, because that would be an added cost. And even with an ex-flood zone, I did not have to necessarily purchase it, but I've purchased it every year. I've been in the home for 11 years this month, and it has gone, I would say it was maybe like $300 or $400, and now it's like over $1,000, which is like crazy. And it's flooding like more on like certain parts of the like neighborhood streets, like where it's kind of like rivers.
And it didn't before?
And it didn't before. And that is alarming to me. And this was just for those like, quick rainstorms that we had twice this summer.
Yeah.
And so the flood insurance, the National Flood Insurance Program is supposed to run out or something. There's supposed to be an expiration, I think, in September, or I think it's September, because there's a lot of budgetary things that Congress has to come back and do. And, when I'm thinking about budget stuff, I'm like, well, both sides have to get that through. And that it's not just abstract stuff. Like, it's like when you leave like funding just there on the table, it's stuff that lands on us. So I don't think we should be allowing that to expire, because then it's going to be a whole issue. And that's we're still in hurricane season here. So that's particular to the flood insurance. I think I also spoke to you before, or when we did the other interview about the car insurance, is a lot of times like there's discriminatory practices and things like that. So we need some like regulation around that. I had another thought on the issue. Oh, affordability. Well, another thing that's gone off is gas.
Yeah. And
I realized this because as a candidate for Congress, you're driving all over a big district of 500 precincts in 8 parishes, and the price of gas going up for a war that Congress didn't authorize. Yeah. So that's something that should not have happened. And we have to keep telling that point, is that when you don't abide by the separation of powers and the checks and balances, we're feeling it at the pump.
Yeah.
We're feeling it at the pump. We're feeling it at the grocery store, because the gasoline that is used to ship food to the grocery store, that's jacking up the price. And then we obviously, and then we've got lack of regulation on food, making us sick, which is then benefiting the healthcare industry, because people are having to go to emergency room or healthcare clinics. It's all in each other. And and we need to also cap prescription drug prices too. So there's just lots of things affordability wise that have to be done on that level. But I mean, the gasoline prices are, I think even here, they're not as high as probably some other places. I'm sure our eyes would pop out if we saw them at other places, but people need to, and in Louisiana, in our district, even, we don't have reliable, good, strong, reliable public transit. Mm-hmm. If for some reason, you couldn't pay for your gasoline, or you did get into an accident and the car insurance is expensive. We don't have some of these things that we need to make it feasible so that someone can go to their place of employment versus have issues with getting there.
That's one of the ironic things. It's not ironic if you understand, the different ideologies of the parties, but it is often Republicans who are suffering the most in these situations where the cost of living skyrockets, where a foreign war is jacking up the price of gas because of the lack of those government services that could be an alternative offset, right? Mm-hmm, so in a lot of these rural places, even the idea of buses or public transit isn't even on the table. But in a place like Louisiana, broadly, public transit is underfunded, and so when gas prices jack up, it's not like people are like, all right, well, I guess we're just not going to drive the car this week. We're just going to take the bus. That's often not a feasible
Right.
option for folks.
Right.
And so you're not just jacking up gas prices. You really are forcing people into a more expensive lifestyle, whether they can afford it or not.
Yeah.
And you often hear that in a place like Baton Rouge, well, Baton Rouge is a car place. Like, that's a place where you have to have a car. But that's a very real economic consideration for folks, because especially the costs of cars, the costs of gas. If life gets more expensive, but your wages or your salary doesn't, you're just in a tough situation.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads me to why, and I'm really curious. There's a bunch of questions here, but you were talking about the impact of the costs of gas going up on your campaign. Why is it important for a normal person, somebody that is dealing with normal day-to-day issues, a special education teacher, somebody that has a normal job? Why is it important for normal people to get elected to Congress as opposed to the sort of political class? When it comes to votes on the budget, when it comes to votes for legislation, you even mentioned, what was it? There was something that had effect that you noticed in the funding. That somebody else might not have noticed if they were the flood insurance. If you're not living in a place where flood insurance is an issue, if you're not living in a flood zone, if cost is not an issue for you, you may not notice these things that pop up in a budget where a deadline is there, the funding is about to run out. Why is it important that somebody who is affected by these things at a granular level is representing them in Congress?
Yeah, I have been a teacher since I've been 22. So that was my first real job. I worked in a bookstore when I was in undergrad and college. And so I've worked for a long time in my life. And I was lucky to get scholarships in college. But I had loans up until probably last year or the year before that, undergrad loans. Luckily my master's was paid for, but not everybody's in that. So people are saddled with their undergrad or master's, or graduate debt.
So,
yes,
right.
the loans. And so that's a piece of it. But I think, and especially if you are in professions like teaching, law, that you have to have higher degrees to teach or to work. I have seen what I have to do to just make sure that I can, afford all my bills. And when things go up, it's tough. Especially when your salary is not going up with it. And I'm a teacher and I'm making, an income where I can live in my house and pay the bills on regular time. But a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. And then, like I mentioned, the minimum wage, $7.25. And that's been for 15 years, 16 years. Yeah. But everything else has gone up. I mean, I've seen it gone up, and and my salary has not been, it's little, you can see a little bit of it going up. And we've had so many disputes about teacher pay raises, especially with the new administration. And we got some pay raises with the previous governor, but it's a fight just to get
the recent pay raise.
That's a whole thing. But but one of our Congress people, I think it's Ayanna Pressley, has said the people who are closest to the problem usually have better solutions, or they're closer to the solution. If you've been in Congress for 18 years, and prior to that you were in the legislature for 12 years, and yes, you probably had to have some kind of other job because we know it doesn't pay, an annual salary. Yeah. But some of the legislators are able to do that because they have independent wealth or whatever, which then another barrier to access. But 30 years in elected office, I'm not saying you're not meeting with constituents, but most of my people in the district have said, I write, I don't hear back, I don't see the person, they're not addressing my real material concerns that I'm really concerned about. And people are writing about all the things we're running on: affordability, healthcare, education. That is just such a disconnect. It's the lack of proximity to the problem. I see children come in my classroom who didn't get a good night's sleep because of affordable housing issues, or come in and they're hungry because they missed breakfast, they overslept, bill wasn't paid, so they didn't have, alarm clock didn't go off. Like all these little things that I see in terms of people not getting their needs met. And I know people say it was like, well, sometimes it's personal responsibility. Like, but there is responsibility also when our representatives are working for us and the prices are just going up, like energy costs, like the energy bills are so high. It's a big chunk of what I have to pay a month at the house. The mortgages that we pay for our homes are sometimes less than what the homeowner's insurance costs is yearly. Like that is just wild. Like, I mean, my homeowner's insurance went up too because my one insurance company left the state after Ida. And so there's just all these things that I deal with and see as a teacher coming and spilling over to my classroom. But then just like, I'm an average everyday person. I got to pay my bills. I got to, pay for gas and groceries. And I mean, running for office keeps me busy enough for it. Like, but if you just like, I think it's not just about getting by. Like people should be able to have their basic needs for housing, food, those healthcare, like these things are basic things people need to survive. And then they should be able to thrive too. Like if they want to do something that's fun, like they should be able to do that. Like, I mean, my mom grew up as one of 9, like, so they really, lived on a tight budget, like 9 children and one that had a disability. Like, so, it's, and but there's things that we can be doing on a level to take care of people, especially in my opinion when we're spending so much money of our country bombing other places. Like I just we are spending money bombing other countries and hurting other children and families, and our children and families here don't have what they need. Like that is just wild to me when I think about that. Like, and I want kids to have what they need to be like successful. There's too much research out there that says like all of the developmental benefits when children have like good homes, good nutritious food, and good schools, and that our communities have like good infrastructure. Like we should have that. We are a country that is one of the wealthiest in the world, if not the wealthiest, and also have some of the like largest percentage of billionaires and trillionaires in our country, like in terms of the world, I think. Yeah. I'm not saying people can't make their money, but like we should be having more distribution of like the wealth to make sure that people aren't going without.
Should people be allowed to become trillionaires?
I don't think so. That's just how do you even spend all that money?
That is a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
It's insane. But also the level of wealth that billionaires have is mind-boggling. Because I think when I was a kid, I think a couple $1 billion was considered like, unprecedented levels of wealth, and like you were talking about, just a handful of people that were even approaching it. I think when I was a kid, Bill Gates would kind of like waffle between being a billionaire and like a very high multi-millionaire, mm-hmm. And now hundreds of billions of dollars is, I'm not gonna say the norm, but that is becoming kind of the headline for your wealthiest people in the world. And Elon Musk flirting with the $1 trillion level is both wild and unfortunate that it's him.
We should not, and I don't think we should become desensitized to the fact that like there's that so much more wealth, because as we've gotten more of those billionaires and a trillionaire, it's just more disparity of wealth. Like that, like I mean, that's part of the reason for getting in the race too, is like we're at this like crisis point where people, like, I've never seen that like level of like just and like anxiety around being able to afford things. It's weird. I mean, and I know people have probably gone through that at various points before, but like it's a lot of people who talk about it in a way that they haven't ever in my lifetime talked about it. So it's I think it's real, for sure.
Immigration has remained one of the defining issues of the Trump administration, of Republicans, of this MAGA movement for really the last decade. I would argue that part of the reason why Republicans have been able to make so much hay out of this issue is in part because of Democrats' inability to respond appropriately or in a way that is satisfactory to a lot of people on the issue of immigration.
Yeah.
What is your stance on immigration into this country? What the effect of immigration is on this country, both economically but historically, and what would immigration policy look like if you could draft it and whatever you drafted was signed into law?
So I will say I have signed, as a candidate, I signed a pledge that I would commit to abolish ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, because of the transgressions of and violations of due process that have occurred in the last, especially the last year and a half, have been egregious. We're literally murdering people in the street, people that were there as bystanders or American citizens, and also like targeting and surveilling people and having the wrong person like this, like and these are people that are in unmarked vehicles, masked. Like it is like so shocking, and the people here have had to deal with it because ICE was here in November, in December. It impacted schools because families kept their kids home. There was a lot of fear. There's still a lot of fear within the communities. And this isn't directly in District 1, in parts of Kenner, parts of Hammond, which are districts or cities in District 1. So I do think we need to have, like, this is to me a humanitarian issue, and we need to have a human-centered approach, which means there needs to be clear, like, pathways to citizenship that don't get continuously stalled, because that's what these are the stories that keep coming out, and people saying like, I got picked up by deportation, or I'm deported, and they were doing all the steps right in the process, but somehow like the process didn't finish, or it didn't get, and I don't know the intricacies, as if it was like just there's not enough staffing, there's not enough resources to speed that process up. So I do think we need pathways for people that want that citizenship, and then that needs to be not delayed, because I think that has caused a lot of issues. I also know that there's been some people that come with seasonal work too, and that was like a big thing in the news, especially with the crawfish farmers or the peelers. So in that sense too, like we have to look at how those processes like were impacted by the administration's stances on immigration, because it did impact us economically, because we do have a lot of people that come seasonally, but also make sure that those people are not exploited, because there's a lot of times that they are. So there needs to be like protections for people who are coming and doing work here, and then just also recognizing the fact that like historically many people who came here in the wake of storms have been immigrants and have helped rebuild our communities. These are our neighbors. these are people who contribute to our community. And so there's this like so much, I really don't like the rhetoric around like the labeling of people, because it's all just like you hear immigration and then it's just like there's criminals, they're criminals, and there's like traffickers and all this stuff. We need to have mechanisms in place so that we can deal with people that are not adhering to like law and are engaging in criminal activity. But from what we've seen with what ICE is doing, these are people who are not doing that stuff. It's causing a lot of harm and fear and trauma in the community, and I feel that ICE is beyond like reproach. Sorry, in that regard. So I do think we need that. And then like in terms of border, a lot of issues too is there's not a lot of staffing and resources at those places either. So like maybe we need to like be looking into that. And I'm not like people want to build a wall, but like you don't even have the proper people. A lot of this sometimes it goes back and look at as a teacher, you don't have enough people in place to like, or staffing and resources. You're doing things on such a limited basis. Like, so I am always about human-centered approaches first, and like locking children up in cages without any support for medical needs and those sorts of things like we've seen at Dilley. We should be ashamed as a country that we have been engaging in that type of stuff. So
is there anything that in the last 10 years Republicans have gotten right on immigration that is there anything regarding their approach to immigration in the last 10 years that Republicans have gotten right, or that at the very least was a legitimate concern for them to address, even if their solution wasn't appropriate?
I'd have to look into that. I mean, I do know that the issues with immigration and like ICE in the communities like where I live nearby, I mean, that started right after Trump got elected in 2016. So, I mean, I can just speak that there was already fear at that point. And I mean, that's how I met some people in those communities who were upset and organizing around that. But I'd have to look and get back to you on that, because there might be something. I don't want to say there's nothing, but I will say that there was fear in the first administration, and it's just amplified like to a high degree in this one. I mean, before our eyes, like multiple times, to the point where I'm hoping people don't become desensitized to that kind of stuff either, because once was enough. It should never have happened, and then it happened again, and then it happened again. It's happening too many times. That's a pattern, and it shouldn't be happening.
No, and also, I mean, Trump has essentially made ICE into his, secret police, and so that like there are certainly lessons that clearly, bad lessons that were learned from the first administration that I think that he's learned and implemented into the second. One of them is that he feels as if he has a little bit more authority and flexibility using ICE to be able to administer law enforcement.
Well, and I will say too, because of those like violations, like, it's not just him that needs to be held accountable for things. It's the people in his administration. It's the other people behind him. He's a figurehead to some degree, and he does call the shots in many ways, but other people are, surrounding him and allowing that to happen. And I do want to point out that there was a recent DNC meeting, and the DNC did pass a resolution about abolishing ICE and standing in support of that. And that came from our committee woman, Michelle Johnson, here in Louisiana. And, there's just so much historically with how ICE has surveilled Black and Brown communities. And so they're hit hardest most when we're thinking about how ICE has been deployed in communities.
And last thing on ICE, when you say abolish ICE, do you mean the elimination of any sort of immigration enforcement agency, or are you talking about essentially the reputational damage that ICE itself has accrued has made it so that it no longer has the legitimacy to actually be out there in the field.
The latter.
Okay.
Yeah, at this point, yeah, we have to do something different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears to foreign policy. So we are in the midst of a handful of fronts, specifically, and most recently, obviously, the war with Iran.
Mm-hmm.
What is your overall position of our involvement in that war? Obviously, our provocation of that war. What is your position on Iran in general? Both in theory, them being pursuing a nuclear weapon, and this administration's approach to their theoretical nuclear pursuits. What is your position on the U.S.'s involvement in Iran right now?
Well, I think I mentioned before, we should not have been in that war as it is right now in terms of the lack of vote from Congress, because that is required, and we didn't do that.
If it had been submitted, if it had been put up for a vote, you were in Congress, would you have voted for it with the information that has been made available?
I don't know. I don't think we didn't have that. We didn't have the luxury of that. The fact that we bombed a school of children, if that was the vote to do that, no. I was literally at a conference with teachers the day that happened, and I'm just like, we're bombing a school of children? These are civilians. So I'm always going to stand on the side of, when we're dealing with foreign policies, is humanitarian rights, civilian rights. There's things that the governments are doing that we're collateral damage for. There's a lot of trauma in the wake of that. And I look at a lot of issues of war that we're dealing with right now as disability, through a disability lens. So war causes resources to people who are already elderly or disabled. They can't get those because, everything has been in shambles. But then it also is creating people to be disabled and then be cut off from those resources. So it is an issue of disability justice for me when we're talking about creating situations of more war, and what kind of diplomacy can we look to first, because I don't think that this administration, while it, I think it's the wealthiest administration in cabinet we've ever had in the history of the
multimillionaires are in it, and it's more than any other
these
administration.
And we know to be true that some of these people are also not qualified to be doing the positions that they're doing.
You're saying that RFK Jr. isn't qualified.
And I was saying that. No, he is not. And neither is the lady leading up the education department either. So when you have people who are not skilled in the area of the department that they're leading, of course they're not going to be skilled in diplomacy or foreign relations.
Yeah.
They're just going to be, it sounds to me, I've seen, it's just that you're going towards aggressive military tactics. And that's clearly is not serving us well, because we're feeling it at our gas pump and at our grocery lines right now too, with that particular conflict. So yeah.
Last one on foreign policy. What would you identify as the I apologize, I should probably dust this table one of these days. What would you identify as as America's most urgent foreign policy, either threat or opportunity or just issue that we need to be focusing on in the, let's just say, for the next Congress?
Well, because and it is a very, I know it comes up in a lot of people running for Congress, and it's been a long time thing, but I mean, I just want to say that I don't stand by what's happening right now in Gaza. With again, I've said I'm an advocate for kids, and like, again, it's we have to come to a solution where we're not sending military aid to a country that is continuing to like hurt children in another country. I mean, I have committed to not taking money from PACs that are allowing that to happen or influence votes on that. So we're sending military aid, and we need to have a boycott on that. So I think that's a very pressing issue right now in the world, because it creating that situation, people like are dismissing it, and it's already been named. It's been named as a humanitarian issue and genocide. I mean, I know the whole thing is very divisive, but like I don't stand by us sending aid over there and weapons over there. I mean, and I think there's a difference between calling out the actions of the Israeli government and Netanyahu, and then there's a difference between the real fear that our neighbors and people here in America and across the world feel around issues of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. These are real things, and they have only increased with these issues. But these are people that have been impacted, and I don't think it's wrong to advocate for children like across the world. That is like, I advocate for kids in my school, my city, my state, my country, but like around the world. It's like, we have to, like, and that is an issue that I think we need to, point out that we shouldn't be having, aid to countries that are dealing with human rights abuses and across the world.
I think the nuance on that is frustratingly absent. The ability to have a nuanced conversation on that.
I know.
In the same way that I think people would understand you being pro-America without endorsing everything that Donald Trump and the Republicans are instituting in policy, you would think that people would have the room to understand that somebody can be against the policies and foreign policy actions of a country without immediately accusing them of being anti-Semitic. And I get that the people that are making those accusations, I don't think are doing so in good faith. It's just an effective tactic, but it has made it very difficult to have this conversation without it immediately getting into these other places. Because I think that it's fair to say, if this country is doing something that is not consistent with our values, why would we still fund it, except we have all these other things that get added to the conversation?
Yeah,
it makes
that's
it
fair.
difficult to have a fair conversation about
Yeah, but that's my position on it. I come from it like as somebody who's taught children and advocated for them a whole career. I want what's best for kids here, and I want what's best for kids abroad, all over.
Yeah. Last thing. So you are running against not only a Republican incumbent, not only one who's been there for almost 20 years, but he's in leadership. And one of the characteristics of leadership, legislative leadership positions for either party is that they typically pick folks that are in the safest of safe districts, the most gerrymandered of districts, because they don't want surprises on election day that the Speaker of the House loses his race or the House Majority Leader loses theirs. So that's one reality of the dynamics in your race. But the other is just the fact that anytime you're running against an incumbent, it's not just a question of, hi, I'm Lauren, I'm a good candidate, vote for me. It's also the necessary flip side of that, which is there's somebody in the job I'm applying for right now, and here's why this person shouldn't be there. Here's why you should fire this person. Because the easier thing to do is either vote for the incumbent or not vote at all and let the incumbent keep their job. What is your case for why specifically Steve Scalise should lose his job and why Lauren Jewett should replace him in 2026?
Steve Scalise has been in elected office here in Louisiana 30 years, 12 in the legislature, 18 in Congress. So that's like I said, 30 years, 75% of my life. And I asked voters and asked people, I said, has there been improvement in your quality of life in the past 30 years? And maybe in the beginning, but these last few years, I know it's been rough, and that's what comes up at the doors. And, you know, his role as the House Majority Leader is really to set the agenda. And before that, I think he was maybe the minority or majority whip. I don't remember then. Yeah. So he's had positions of authority, and the legislature redrew these maps twice, 2024 and 2026, because they wanted to protect those seats. They said that on the floor. I'm not mincing words. They said that. They had a compelling interest to protect Scalise's and Johnson's seat. But even just what you've shepherded a bill through a process, Scalise has done 4 bills, just 4 bills in that time. And of course, maybe people would argue that his position as House Majority Leader, he's too busy with that to like be writing more legislation. But I think we should, in 18 years, we should have more bills, like, you know, to show for that have gone through the process and been signed into law. And ultimately, I'm not a party loyalist. Like, you know, I will call out my own party when I think that there needs to be improvement. And we have a party loyalist right now who is in that position and is doing the president's bidding. And I think that's dishonoring the oath of the Constitution. And it's time to have a change when people are dealing with the actual material realities of decisions that this administration has made. So Steve Scalise has complete kind of entrenchment in that with the president. I mean, he's co-signing mostly everything that the president is doing and saying it's a good job. And I will also say doesn't show up to have town halls with the constituents and hear other ideas. I have to hear all these new ideas at the doors when I talk to voters. And that is almost like I'm on a mobile town hall kind of when I'm knocking on doors. But to not have any physical town halls in the district in over a decade, to have town halls that are just robo phone calls that you got to pick up. I mean, that's not engagement at a level that is needed. People are hurting, and we have to have something different. I mean, and so, you know, I'm somebody who shows up. I show up. I've been in this community. I am here knocking on doors in the heat of Louisiana while our congressman is stumping for other people in Nebraska and other parts of the country on his recess. He should be here. I mean, talking to constituents. Like, I'm the only candidate in this race that is actually on the ground talking to people. And so if you want somebody who's going to show up and who is going to listen to you and do their best to deliver on the concerns that you're bringing to us, like, that's me. No one else can make that case, like, in this race. And he's just been absent. And they work for us. They don't work for the other. I mean, we're working for other Congress people right now to help them get elected. Because he thinks he's reliably safe, and maybe that's true. But like, we're doing a serious race and showing people what good representation should look like. So that's why I'm the choice.
Okay. That is Lauren Jewett, Democratic candidate. I will call her the Democratic nominee for Congress and Louisiana's 1st Congressional District. She is running against Republican House Majority Leader Steve Scalise. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.